Hello, my friends. D.L. Anderson here. Welcome back to Transformation by Truth podcast as we share the truth concerning these last days and what you must do to save yourself from the violent times that are just ahead. Today's podcast is a word of truth accounting of the end times. The end is coming. The end is near. Today's podcast is entitled End Times 501, The Spiritual Disease of Ignorance, Part 1. Is ignorance surely bliss? The podcast objectives are reveal the great dilemma of ignorance, analyze why those who fear Elohim are not judged for lack of knowledge, reveal who you are really serving when you serve yourself, and analyze the bliss of willful ignorance. Now, before we begin today's lesson, I would like to welcome all my beloved brothers and sisters in Yahushua Messiah who have been scattered to the four corners of the earth, who Yahuwah has joined to this ministry for such a time as this. I would also like to welcome anyone who is engaging our podcasts or videos for the first time. We trust you were led by the set apart spirit in finding us. And if you continue to be led, we hope you stay with us. For these are troubling times, and an evil day is just ahead. To this end, if you are watching this video on YouTube and you have not subscribed to our channel, click the subscribe button below, and you will be alerted whenever we post new videos. Also, if you have any questions at the conclusion of this video, you can ask them using the link in the podcast description below the video player. Last but not least, if you like the video, please give it a thumbs up so YouTube can share it with believers like us. The great dilemma of ignorance. Shalom, my beloved brothers and sisters, and welcome to day 423 of our exposition of lawlessness. In the most recent podcast, I provided an intro to ignorance, i.e., the first of the 16 deadliest degrees of lawlessness. As you learned in that podcast, ignorance is one of the two primary degrees of lawlessness that is designed to prevent you from receiving the knowledge of the will of Elohim. The other is deception. Along these lines, deception is the enemy nation, and ignorance is the invading army. To it, both degrees work together to prevent you from receiving Yahuwah's will. The same way disobedience and doubt work together to subjugate your mind. Now, the alliance between deception and ignorance, although very deadly, is fascinating to study, and the knowledge thereof is beyond vital to your success in this phase of your quest. Here is why. While deception amplifies Satan's greatest strength, ignorance magnifies one of man's greatest weaknesses, that is, his tendency towards complacency. Here lies the problem, and a truth you should already know. Vis-a-vis, complacency is the only degree of lawlessness that has the power to open you up to the other 80 degrees. And thus, the following is true. The most dangerous degrees of lawlessness are those that have the greatest power to reinfect you with the spirit of complacency. For in doing so, they can infect you with them all. Now, it should be quite clear that ignorance has this great power, to wit, The very purpose of ignorance is to cause you to be complacent regarding some facet of the Father's will under the following faulty premise. If I don't know what Yahuwah's will is, then I cannot be held accountable for my lack of knowledge. For knowledge is the baseline for judgment. Ergo, where there is no knowledge, there can be no judgment. Now, the latter half of this premise is true, and yet the former half is most certainly not true. And as it represents the great dilemma of ignorance, I will address it in this podcast. Let's get started. If you are committed to spiritual mastery. Now, let's begin by analyzing the former half of the premise that is not true. That is, the presumption that you cannot be held accountable for your lack of knowledge concerning Yahuwah's will. Brothers and sisters, I submit to you Exhibit A, vis-a-vis the divine scriptures. Listen to me. The word of truth reveals on multiple occasions that the people of Elohim, past and present, have been destroyed for lack of knowledge. And thus, we conclude you can be judged and destroyed for your lack of knowledge. This brings me to Exhibit B. Lack of knowledge is equated to ignorance, i.e., a spiritual disease of lawlessness. And the word of truth reveals the future of all those doing lawlessness. They will all have their part in the lake of fire. Now, I could continue with surplus exhibits, but time is of the essence, my friends, always of the essence. Therefore, we should pivot this discussion to analyzing the real issue. That is to ask, why are you lacking knowledge? That, my friends, is the question. And there are only two possible answers. And the first answer only applies to those of us who are being transformed into the spiritual standard of Yahushua Messiah. Get this. Our lack of knowledge is not punitive because we are in Yahuwah's will. Ergo, we are meeting his expectations. And thus, we conclude the knowledge we are lacking is outside of the scope of Yahuwah's will for our life. To wit, he did not expect us to possess said knowledge at this particular interval in our quest. Now, this speaks to the fact that your unique quest for holiness, perfection, and everlasting life is synchronized with all the talents, gifts, etc. Yahuwah has afforded you, the sum of which generates expectations. And Yahuwah's will, as it pertains to knowledge, is for you to meet these expectations. We discussed this matter in End Times 363, The Power of Mastery, which was posted on October 28th, 2024. And we also addressed the topic of mastery in End Times 410, What Happens When You Resist the Truth, which was posted on January 29th, 2025. My dear friends, I encourage you to find the time to listen to these podcasts. In doing so, you will see how you will never be held accountable for knowledge you don't have if you are committed to spiritual mastery. When you serve yourself. Now, this summation answers why we, the true contenders for the seal of Elohim, are not judged for our lack of knowledge. It is because we are wearing the girdle of truth, and we can only be led into truth and knowledge by the will of Elohim. That's the key, my friends, and the primary difference between us and those who are not wearing the girdle of truth. Vis-a-vis, we are receiving knowledge according to Yahuwah's will, to wit, at a pace that reflects our spiritual grade. On the other hand, those who are not wearing the girdle of truth are not receiving knowledge at all. And yet, their lack of knowledge does not relieve them of Yahuwah's expectations. Here is why. Yahuwah's expectations for you are not aligned with your reality and the quality of your choices. Quite the contrary, Yahuwah's expectations for you are aligned with his reality and his divine purpose for creating you. Now, that was the inflection. Here is the problem. To wit, many are not concerned about Yahuwah's reality or divine purpose because they are more interested in their own reality and their own purpose. Here is what they fail to realize. Those who are fixated on their own reality and purpose will generate a self-will that reflects the carnal desires of the Ruach of self. Here lies the problem. Vis-a-vis, you cannot pursue the will of Elohim and at the same time pursue your own selfish will. For look, listen, it has been written, choose you this day whom you will serve. Now, as simple as this matter is to understand, it is complicated by the reality that the majority in this nation are dishonest. Ergo, they will say they serve Elohim when the truth is they are serving the Ruach of self. And by serving the Ruach of self, they are serving the wicked one. If you're not convinced, I advise you to search the scriptures. For look, listen, it has been written, I know your works and pressure and poverty, yet you are rich, and the blasphemy of those who say they are Yehudim and are not, but are a synagogue of Satan. Now, the key to understanding this verse is understanding the state of the nation of Israel at the time it was written. To wit, Israel had evolved into a spiritual nation, which is why John describes the false claims of these false Hebrews as blasphemy, i.e., a spiritual degree of lawlessness. This is why John refers to these false Hebrews as the synagogue of Satan, for Satan is their father, for they are his spiritual offspring. Ergo, they are his servants. For look, listen, it has been written, you are servants of the one whom you obey. Yahushua Messiah confirms this matter in the parable of the darnel of the field, aka the wheat and the tares. Not only this, but I have invested an entire podcast disclosing this matter. To that end, I advise you to listen to End Times 302, an intro to lawlessness, part 2, which was posted on July 3rd, 2024. Trust me, this is a powerful lesson that will give you supreme clarity concerning these matters. Is ignorance surely bliss? Now, this brings us back to the beginning. That is, the great dilemma of ignorance and how it is designed to reinfect you with complacency. Consider the following definition of ignorance, and it should become clearer. By definition, ignorance is a lack of knowledge, learning, information, understanding, and or awareness. Now, per this definition, ignorance is a direct result of your lack of learning. My dear friends, this can only be your reality if you are operating in complacency and disregarding the countless opportunities you have to learn in your quest. Not only this, but the primary reason you will stand in disregard is because you are not really interested in following the will of Elohim. And where there is little to no interest, there will be little to no learning. Facts. Now, this brings us to the question of the hour vis a vis why are so many who are operating in ignorance blind to the obvious fact that they are operating in ignorance? The answer is sure. It is because the primary driver of ignorance is deception. Along these lines, there is a deceptive feeling of bliss that comes with ignorance, and it is so powerful and pervasive that I will offer it to you as a revelation. Consider this, my friends, and be advised. The enemy has created an alternate reality where false believers can disregard the desire of Elohim and believe they are yet in his will. And the primary driver of this false reality is a deceptive feeling of bliss, i.e., false security that is parallel to the pursuit of lawlessness. My dear friends, you must believe me. I know because I've seen it. I've witnessed the assembly of the unrighteous. And despite the fact that everyone within these spiritual cesspools is in fact ignorant, they all possess a certain measure of bliss and contentment with their false worship. The reason why is sure. It's because they are under a strong delusion, which is the highest form of deception and a prominent point of no return associated with this quest. And thus, you must appreciate how ignorance puts you on a death track that becomes impossible to evade. And you will in this series on ignorance, deception, and knowledge. Trust me, this is a series you won't want to miss. Until then, I caution you to consider the end result of ignorance and ask yourself, is ignorance surely bliss? Now, here is the final word. Spiritual graveyards host every kind, the fool, the ignorant, and the blind. Brothers and sisters, hear me carefully as I say, only a fool would embrace the spirit of ignorance and make himself blind to the truth, wherein lies the power to save. And yet, fools are following this broken path, and the ignorant are dying every day. You will see why as we continue this series and how ignorance is any and everything but bliss. And all who think otherwise are under a delusion, and every thought is thought amiss. Heretofore, I recommend don't ignore the truth when you see it. Don't be a fool and close your eyes. For the man who willfully ignores the truth is the man who is sleeping as he dies. Now, here is today's assignment. Meditate on today's lesson. And if you have any questions, please submit them using the form at pinnacleofholiness.com. And I will respond to you as soon as I can. Now, here is what's next. We completed today's podcast, End Times 501, The Spiritual Disease of Ignorance, Part 1. And the next podcast is entitled, The Divided Nation of Israel, Part 1. I will post this podcast on Friday, August 29th, 2025. Until then, my friends, continue to be led by the spirit of Elohim. Continue to watch, Continue to pray, continue in fasting, and most of all, continue to be focused, for the end is coming. The end is near.